Okay, let's turn our attention to class and the role that this idea plays in Marx's thought. And I always like to joke around that if you're ever given a question about Marx and you answer class, in some way your answer is right. Whether or not you know why it's right or whether or not you specified why it's right, class answers a lot of things for Marx because so much of his thought is tied to this idea. So it's really important for us to have a good conception and a good understanding of what Marx means by class. Now, before we do that, we have to talk about a couple of preliminary things in order to appreciate how Marx defines class. So the first thing we need to talk about is the mode of production. And for Marx, the mode of production is the forces or means of production. So the forces or means of production, along with the relations of production in a given economic system to produce the necessities of life. There's a lot going on here, so we're going to break this definition down into a couple of component parts. So this idea of the relations of production, what that basically boils down to is the ownership structures of the means of production. So who owns what? So another way to think of it, these are the social relationships of production. The means of production are the tools or instruments that you use to create things of value, along with the raw materials or raw inputs. So, for example, if I am going to make a car, obviously I need certain raw materials. I'm going to need steel and rubber and plastic and those things in order to create the car. But then I'm also going to need certain tools or instruments. So I'm going to need machines that can press certain things. I might need robots that can weld together different parts of the car. I need an assembly line, those kinds of things. So the tools and raw materials are the means of production. The relationships, that should say of, not or, of production is the ownership structure, who owns what. And these two things in combination give us the mode of production in a given historical setting. Because these things that are used to create value are basically the same things as they use to produce the necessities of life. So we're going to see in a minute that class is tied most directly to this idea of the means of production. And just to help us give a more robust sense of what we mean by this, we can give some examples. So if you think of feudalism, and you can think of what was the main thing that was used to create other things of value, the answer is land. So land was feudalism's main means of production. We know that during the Industrial Revolution, and arguably even through now, that under capitalism, the main means of production, the main places where things of value are created are factories. Now, it is true that we still have people that are using the land to create things of value, such as food, and also other raw materials like extracting minerals from the ground. So, not every society just has one form of the means of production. Often there are many going on, but usually there's one dominant means of production, one primary form in which the things of value are produced. All right, once we have a sense of these ideas, then we can turn to our definition of class. And for Marx, class equals a group of people sharing a common relationship to the means of production. Right? So a common relationship to the tools and raw materials that are used to create things of value in a given society. And the word relationship here in the sense of a group of people having a shared common relationship, means the same thing as it did with the relationships of production. The question is, do you own and or control the means of production or not? So under feudalism, all the people who owned land and had serfs working on it, they would be part of the same class because they had the same relationship to the means of production. They were owners. In contrast, serfs and peasants who worked the land would share the same class position because they don't own or control this particular means of production. If we turn our attention then to capitalism and capitalistic societies, Marx wants to argue there's two main classes. And these are phrases you might be familiar with, but maybe not, but just so we're all on the same page. On the one hand, we have the bourgeoisie, and these are the owners of the primary means of production in capitalism. So these are the owners of factories. Or at least that's what Marx conceived as being the typical member of the bourgeoisie. In contrast, we have the proletariats who don't own those factories, right? So they don't own the primary form of the means of production in this given society, but they are owners of their ability to labor. So they're owners of what Marx calls labor power. And we'll talk more about this idea of labor power and why it's important to Marx's thought. But these are the two main classes: the owners of the factories, the bourgeoisie, the owners of the people who can work, or the workers, the proletariats. One other thing to note about Marx's conception of class is that class is an objective condition. It all boils down to your relationship to the means of production, independently of what you think about that relationship, whether you think it's good or bad, independent of how much income you earn. It's an objective condition. And we'll see that this idea of class and Marx's notion of class contrasts with some other conceptions of class, particularly Weber's. And we'll kind of go through and compare and contrast Marx's conception of class with Weber's. But for us, the main thing for Marx, class is an objective social condition. All right, what we're going to do now is we're going to turn our attention to historical materialism, what that means and why it's important in Marx's thought.